quick test. Quick test. Testing. Testing 1, 2. Testing.
District Tribal Council, in particular with Mi'kmaq title, Aboriginal title. We're all from the same nations, and the basis of Aboriginal title is founded within our hereditary governments. When the settlers came, that was the governments they dealt with. There was no elected governance at that time. It was our traditional governments. So we're proud to say we still have traditional government in Listugush, active and progressing. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Mr. Bruce MacGyver.
Thank you very much. I particularly appreciate that because as a lawyer, I don't get very many ovations, so thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for the invite. Thanks, Kathy. Thanks for the 7th District inviting us here. I was very sorry to hear about Listugush's loss, so I'm sorry to hear that. We've had a really invigorating day here. We've been in meetings since 10 o'clock this morning. I apologize for those that have been at some of them already. I may say some of the same things again, so sorry for that. But it's been really uplifting and invigorating for all of us. I love doing this work. I feel really privileged, honored to do this work. Thank you for coming out. I know you all have very busy lives, and coming to hear a lawyer speak may not be at the top of your must-do list, but we appreciate you coming out. I'll just introduce a couple of the people that are kind enough to come along with me. Saber Pictou Lee, Saber's an articling student with us. That means that she'll be a lawyer next year, so we have a really strong Mi'kmaq lawyer. She's from Eel Bar and lives nearby, just bought a house in Dalhousie. So we're all planning to come back for a big house warming soon. You're all invited, just so you know. So that's Saber, and then Caitlin Stockwell is a lawyer that has worked with me now for several years. She's fantastic. She's a great junior lawyer, has an incredible future in the law, and I think for everyone at our firm, it's because she doesn't just know the law, but she's really passionate about being an advocate for Indigenous people. So both Saber and Caitlin could come along because we were in Elsipogtog yesterday, and we had some really good meetings with the chief, with Chief Sock, and with the lodge, Goldbit Lodge, and they all send their best. They were excited when I was telling them that we were coming up to talk to all of you about this. They were like, yeah, right on, you know, so they're very supportive. Yeah, so thanks. I'll just explain a little bit where I'm sorry. Coming from, my voice is starting to go a little bit. Most of the times I don't use a mic. I use my courtroom voice. Then you have to stand back a little bit, but I think the mic, yeah, I tried to adjust. Is that better there? Great, thank you. So I'm a lawyer. I always joke, don't hold that against me though. I'm not that kind of lawyer. So, and more importantly, I'm originally from Manitoba. So that's where I'm from. Whoa, that's getting too much. There we go. Should I take it down a couple of? Okay. um, so I was raised on a farm in Manitoba. I don't come from a professional background. That's why I think I get comments from people a lot. I liked listening to you because you didn't sound like a lawyer. So those are the best comments. Hopefully when I'm in court, I do sound a little bit more like a lawyer. But that's where I'm from. My family is a Métis family from Saint Peter's in Manitoba, about 45 minutes north of Winnipeg. But that's not where I grew up, and that was because we were part of the displacement of the Métis. My grandparents were supposed to get some wonderful agricultural land. They didn't get that. We ended up back in the bush farming between a rock ridge and a swamp. So that's where I grew up. And I was the first one to think about, oh, well, maybe go to university. And I had to tell my mom for a long time that I was going to be a teacher because I didn't know what else to say. So she was a bit surprised when I turned into a lawyer. She was, I thought you were going to be a teacher. So now I'm a lawyer. I'm a partner at First Peoples Law, and we're a firm that only represents First Nations, and we have offices in Vancouver and Ottawa, and we have the great honor to work with some amazing Indigenous nations all across the country. And what I do particularly is I do Aboriginal title and rights. That's my thing. I always tell people that's been my calling, is to do that work with my clients. And I do a combination of, sometimes I go to court, but we hope that we can reach a negotiated outcome without actually having to push things through to a court decision. So that's an important point when people are talking about Aboriginal title claims. It's not all the time that you end up having to go to the end of a trial, go to Court of Appeal, go all the way to the Supreme Court. Sometimes filing an Aboriginal title claim is about creating the circumstances to ensure that you can have a conversation about what you want to talk about, and about what you need to talk about, and what the government will not want to talk to you about. So that's a big part of it. So that's the work that I get to do with the rest of my team. As you know, we represent Elsipogtog, and we helped them file an Aboriginal title claim in 2016 for District 6. So that's about a third of New Brunswick, and they decided to do that. We can talk about that a little bit more. All the information I share about that is out in the public, so it's not confidential. So that's a bit about where I'm coming from. What we were asked to do was just talk about what is this Aboriginal title, what does that look like? And the way I start with that is talking about what it's not, because some of you will have been around this for a while, and you'll hear talk about comprehensive claims. Comprehensive claims are not Aboriginal title claims. I got that when I started doing this work with Elsipogtog. We had some members, oh, I heard that there are negotiations for a comprehensive claim. And we had to tell people, no, that's not what we're doing. So comprehensive claims operate within the federal government's policy around comprehensive claims. So they have a policy. You can file a claim, and then you can enter into negotiations for the settlement of that claim. The objective from the government's perspective is full and final settlement. So at the end, you kind of have what looks like a modern day treaty. And they all take their own specific approach. The language has changed about them, but they date back to 1973, I think, now. And in general, the essential parts, at least from my perspective, have not changed. Because ultimately, what they're about is government wants a settlement that will give them certainty. You'll see as a lawyer, like a lot of us, you end up using a lot of these air quotes, right? I was trying to teach my 5-year-old air quotes once, and he went, "Hey, Daddy." I was like, "No, that's not, I don't think you've got it down yet. I am actually your daddy." So, but yeah, so full and final settlement. And what they're about is ensuring certainty for Canada. They've changed the language. I think now, unless it's changed again, they talk about substituting your rights. So you're going to substitute your Aboriginal rights, treaty rights, title rights for whatever is written within that document. So instead of your Aboriginal title, you'll be able to rely on the rights outlined in that document in exchange for, right? And it's like any kind of deal. What does the government get back? Why are they agreeing? And largely they're saying yes because you're saying that you will never rely on your Aboriginal title again. And your children and your grandchildren and 7 generations will never again be able to say, we're exercising our Aboriginal title and rights. Instead, you have to say, we're exercising the rights written within that document. So that's the major difference. It's all, they have a mandate, you operate within the mandate, certain amount of land that you might get control of and so forth, right? That's the old way of doing things. There's still a lot of Indigenous people involved in that. A lot of them got involved decades ago, right? Decades ago, they made a decision, well, hey, we hate the Indian Act. We want to get out of under the Indian Act. And that's totally fair. That's the number one comment I get when I travel around the country. I ask people, why are you in these negotiations? And they say, because we can't stand the Indian Act. And that's legitimate. It's also, you know, it's a real harsh indictment of Canada's colonization project. They put you in such a terrible situation that now you have a lot of Indigenous people thinking, well, I'm going to give up my Aboriginal title and rights. I'm not only giving them up for myself, I'm giving them up for my children, my grandchildren, for my descendants that aren't even born yet, just to get out of under the thumb, not the thumb, the fist of the Indian Act, right? That seems to be often the primary motivation. The thing that has changed, though, is that the laws changed around this. And a lot of Indigenous people across the country are saying, well, wait a minute, maybe that's not for us. Maybe 20 years ago, that was the best viable option. But in 2023, where things are on the law, where things are politically, maybe there's a better way forward than that. So one different option is to say, no, we're not making an agreement to give up title and rights. It's we're going to file a claim in court to say that we have title and rights and we want that recognized, which is very important. It's not a land claim in that sense. And then, as I told the people we were meeting with before, some of them were here, you know, even that language is wrong. I was doing a meeting in Ontario a few weeks ago. Ontario came telling my clients, oh, we're here to discuss your land claim. And we were, whoa, back off, buddy. My clients don't have a land claim. You claim their land. And you've been doing it for hundreds of years. And you've been running around acting like you own the land. You've been calling it Crown land. Who the hell said it was Crown land? Did the Mi'kmaq agree to that? No. You know, I have Anishinaabe clients, Wet'suwet'en clients all across the country. I never agreed it was Crown land. This is part of the fundamental issue that Indigenous people are dealing with, that you're all familiar with. I don't need to tell you this. It's just every day you have to deal with this fundamental lie that Canada is based on, that Quebec is based on, that New Brunswick is based on. This fundamental lie that colonizers can just show up, sail in here, sail up the river. Maybe they didn't even get off the ship. They sailed by, and in sailing by, somehow it becomes their land. And now you have to make a claim for it. It's just a fundamental lie that needs to be corrected. And corrected, I think, at all levels, just the way we talk about it. You know, when I get someone saying, oh, we got to make this decision about Crown land, I'm like, no, man. You know, you have a claim to its Mi'kmaq land. And we're not talking about reserve land. We're talking about all your land. It's not Crown land, it's Mi'kmaq land that the government runs around, whether it's Quebec or New Brunswick or the federal government, acts like they own it. They have no legal entitlement to it. It's like someone set a trailer down in your backyard and then started talking about how they own the land. And now you've got to go and make a land claim for your backyard. They're like, what the hell? Right? So that's what the fundamental issue is. And the question becomes, how do you deal with it? What do you deal, right? So a lot of people, they'll get into, and I'm sure a lot of the First Nations, you know, consulting about different things off reserve. When you're into consulting, you know what you're doing, right? Which is something that I've done a lot of work on. It's still based on the premise that the colonizers, whether it's the federal government, New Brunswick government, Quebec government, get to make decisions. Because what are you consulting about? Their decision. They're coming to consult you about a decision they're going to make about your land. That is screwed up, man. That's screwed up. I don't care how many hundreds of years they've been doing it, doesn't make it right. So what Aboriginal title is about is two main things. It's that you should be able to make the decisions about your land. You should be able to make decisions based on your own laws, on your own governance, about how the lands should be used, or, in a lot of situations, how they shouldn't be used. So many times, my clients, it's about, no, that's a no-go zone. We need to save that. That's where the moose rut, or that's where they calve, you know? It's a place where you shouldn't do things. And it's an expression of the responsibility, each in their own way, that Indigenous people have to the past. You know, you inherited this from your ancestors. Now you carry on that responsibility to them and to the future. It's about protecting the land. So a big part of Aboriginal title is to say, wait a minute, we decide about the land. Not the provincial government, not the federal government. Maybe you'll invite them to consult with you about a decision that you might make, but it's exercising your own laws, your own decision about your lands. That's a huge part of it, and usually for my clients, the most important part, because they want to protect the land for their children, their grandchildren, for the future, and you inherit that responsibility. I know I've just been in the community here for a day. I can feel it. I can feel your ancestors speaking through you at those meetings. Not in the words so much, but in the strength, the power. It's like, I'm always just, wow, these are powerful people. And so it's giving you an opportunity to express that power and to have people acknowledge it and to fulfill your responsibilities to the past and just as importantly to the future. To future Mi'kmaq, you will never know. You'll never know, but they'll be thankful to you. You know, like we talked about before, hearing about what you did in 1981, right? Stepping up, saying enough's enough. That's strength. So Aboriginal title is about that. And Aboriginal title is also about, you know, ensuring that you benefit from the wealth of your land. You live in such a beautiful, rich place. And your ancestors, you know, grew this wonderful Mi'kmaq nation based on that wealth. And now you've had colonizers move in, and they're benefiting from it. They're benefiting from the wealth of your land. And they confine you onto these little reserves, right? When we were driving around, Sabre was really good because she knows the area so well. I'm like, are we on reserve? Are we off reserve? And you see some of these places off reserve. It's like, you know, who benefits from that? You're not. So whether it's logging trucks coming over the bridge, right? Whether it's the smelter, whether it's the fish, the water, the wealth is yours to decide what to do, what not to do, and benefit from. You should all be the richest people around. That's just the fact of it. Instead, that's been denied by hundreds of years of colonization, of the residential schools, the 60s scoop, Indian Act, all that stuff. You know it, right? So Aboriginal title for some Indigenous people, they think, well, that's enough of that. You know, we got to step up and say, we're putting you on notice. We're putting you on notice in your own court based on your own laws. And that's what it's largely about. You can get into the details about it. How I ended up involved with Elsipogtog was, of course, they were, unfortunately, in 2012, with the fracking and the confrontation with the RCMP, And I know they had the support of so many of you and your families and surrounding communities, right? But they were really up against it. Because here's a fracking company and provincial government coming in and saying, no, we're going to take the resources. We're going to do it in such a way that's going to, destroy so much of your land and water and scoot off with the wealth. And no, we're not going to allow that. So after the confrontation in 2012, they reached out to me, and I did the same kind of thing. I flew out on my own dime, and this is important. I'll come up and just talk to you about it. What are the options? So we talked about what's a different way forward, and they ultimately made the decision, and they filed the Aboriginal title claim in 2016. And that, I think, has really changed the conversation between them, the provincial, the federal government, and proponents. Because up until then, they still are the only Mi'kmaq in New Brunswick that have filed an Aboriginal title claim. We put it in court, and we filed for everything. All the land, crown, private, water, foreshore, airspace. My advice was, hey, if you're going to do this big or go home, right? That's what they chose to do. They filed for District 6 because part of the conversation was, well, it's Mi'kmaq title land throughout the territory, but how do you file a claim? So they decided, and I think this made a lot of sense based on your own governance, how you divide yourself traditionally, historically, into districts. They were, well, we're the biggest Mi'kmaq community in District 6, so they filed for District 6, right? Now, it's important with that because, and I'll tell you a bit of a story about this. We didn't have a lot of money when we did the filing, right? They were doing Chase the Ace and all those things to raise some dollars. So we had to attach a map. So we attached the best map that we could get at the time of District 6. And then I did a lot of TV, radio interviews because it really made the news, right? A third of New Brunswick, woo! And I did one with CTV TV, right? And I got on there, and they had made up their own map to show on TV. And when I got off the interview, I was talking to the producer. I was like, hey, that's a better map than we've got. Can you send us a copy of that? So they had done up such a fancy map, right? But it just showed that we could file it without a lot of money, right? But when they filed it, they had to decide what are you going to file for? Okay, District 6. And then really importantly, who are you filing it on behalf of? Because when it comes to title, there's a role for Indian Act, Chief and Council, Indian Act bands, but in a lot of situations, not all the time, but in a lot of situations, the Indian Act band isn't the title holder, right? The title is in a collective, and the Indian Act band is a creation under the Indian Act. And Canada controls membership. You can have a custom code, but still, right, you're operating within it. So a lot of times it's like, well, it's not really the Indian Act band that is the title holder. And what they decided was, no, properly it's the Mi'kmaq Nation that's the title holder. All the nation, all the bands, status, non-status, right? That's the collective that has title over the land. So when Elsipogtog filed it, it gets referred to as their title claim. They're not the claimant. So Chief Sauk and Elder Kenneth Francis, who some of you might know, he's the spokesperson for Gobit Lodge, they filed it on behalf of the Mi'kmaq Nation. So that's really important, how you conceptualize these things, right? They filed, but from the day that they did that, it changed the conversation. Because now, when the government, federal, provincial comes, when a proponent comes, they're in a different position than any other Mi'kmaq. Because here's our title claim. And they give them a copy. You're on notice. We filed this in your court. Don't say you didn't know. We put it here. And so it really did change that conversation. And then one of the things that it did was the federal government at the time was forced to file a defense. And for the first time I saw it, and I can't think of another example, they put into their statement of defense that they wanted to work towards harmonizing Mi'kmaq and Crown title, which I thought was a huge step forward. Harmonizing Mi'kmaq and Crown title. And so since then, and it's public knowledge, they've been in conversations with the federal government. How do you do that? You know, is there a way to move forward without fighting this out in court? So on that one, they filed it, but we haven't taken any more steps in court. Filed it, it changed the conversation, and now they're in a conversation with the federal government. How can we harmonize? Instead of denying Mi'kmaq title, instead of upholding that lie that the colonizers can just show up and claim your land, instead of doing that, why don't we have a conversation about what does exercising Mi'kmaq title in District 6 look like? Not as a comprehensive claim, not giving up any kind of rights, not exchanging, extinguishing, substituting. And at a fundamental level, I think you all know what that's like. It would be like giving up being Mi'kmaq. How could you ever do that? How could you ever stop being Mi'kmaq? And instead of going down that route, let's express who you are as Mi'kmaq. Let's express your authority over the land. Let's express the voice of your ancestors over the land. Let's express the responsibility you have to the future for those lands. So at the basis, that's what Indigenous nations are trying to achieve through Aboriginal title. Fulfill their responsibilities for the past, for the future, not give up anything. Like I know few of the people were saying today, not 1 inch. Not giving anything up, but instead resetting the relationship, like you're, in a large way, what your ancestors did with the peace and friendship treaties. That wasn't about giving anything up. It's what you've always done through wampum, having that relationship. So find a way to do that going forward. I'm eternally optimistic. If I wasn't, I couldn't do this work, but I am because of the optimism of my clients. My clients are optimistic. There's a better future. And you can work towards that better future without giving up who you are and giving up your relationship to the land and those responsibilities. So I was told to speak for 30 minutes. I've got 30 minutes and 43 seconds. Sorry I went over. I'd love to take some questions. If you don't feel comfortable asking them over the mic and stuff, we're going to be around for a while, so perfectly fine to do that. I'm going to be your typical lawyer and suck. I don't know what the answer is. They'll speak for themselves. But I can say we had a really good meeting this morning with Chief and Council. And this is the third one we've done. And I know Kathy was there. And I think Kathy will hopefully attest. I say the same thing regardless of who I'm talking to. Thanks. Oh, sure, here. Nice. Perfect.
I will answer that, Audrey. The current chief and council are working in collaboration with the 7th District Tribal Council on this. In addition, MMS is on board. We gave information sessions, and MMS is part of the Tri-Council that we're all looking for Aboriginal title, Mi'kmaq title. So we have presenting a unified front so that the federal and provincial governments can't peg us against each other. So we are proud to say we are working with the tri-councils and tribal councils that we all are Mi'kmaq people, and we are all after reinstating our Mi'kmaq title. We never lost it, but we have to assert it. Thank you.
That's exactly what I'm talking about, like such powerful Mi'kmaq people. Wow, thank you, Kathy. More questions? I got like 2 or 3 left, and then my voice is going to be shot, so you better get it in.
It will be for the 7th District, which includes Quebec and New Brunswick, which may complicate things, and maybe Bruce McIver could explain, because our territory encompasses 2 provincial governments, that it may be more complicated to initiate the title.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. So that is something you'll need to make a decision about, because the territory includes parts of 2 provinces. What do you do in that situation? It would make it more complicated, but you'll just need to think that through. Where do you file? What do you include? How much? Those are all the kind of details that you need to sort out before you could actually go ahead and file. Thanks. Sir?
Under what premise does the province or any province have concerning what they call crown land?
Right.
Is that by the divine right of kings that is because of that?
Very good question. I would say when I did a talk before for the last couple of years, I couldn't believe the number of times I was called by the CBC and the Globe and Mail to talk about the Pope, because when it comes right back to it, and you know, when the Pope was here in Canada last year, there was a lot of Indigenous people saying you need to renounce the doctrine of discovery, which he didn't do, of course. And now we had this kind of halfway announcement from the Vatican last month, but at the foundation, that's what it's based on. It's based on this racist doctrine that non-Indigenous people can just sail up the river, look at your land, plant a flag, and claim it. Now, in Canada, because they're very Canadian, they don't like using the term doctrine of discovery because it's been renounced all around the world. And so in Canada, we call it the assertion of crown sovereignty. It's just the same thing. It's the same thing, it's just using a different term for it. So everything you hear about reconciliation, and I've written a book about this, you know, reconciliation from the federal government, provincial, from the Canadian courts, is about reconciling your inherent right to the land that you inherit by being Mi'kmaq, reconciling that with this racist doctrine that Champlain can just sail up and claim the land, right? That's why it doesn't really work, because they're always trying to reconcile those things. So that's why a lot of people are like, well, that's enough of that. We just want to exercise our rights. And we want you to acknowledge it is Mi'kmaq land. Now, what are you going to do about it? And that's a different approach. Ma'am?
Are you going to have to go through 3 courts then? You're going to go through the federal level, then the provincial Quebec and provincial New Brunswick? So you'll be in 3 separate courts?
We don't know about that, how it would work. You would have to decide how to file it. But I think one of the things to bear in mind with this is that, yes, you may end up having to fight things out in court, right? But there's also the path where you don't need to fight it out in court.
If the federal creates a treaty, then they will have to step it down to the provinces. They're not going to turn it over.
No, they're not turning over a darn thing. They're not doing that. But the conversation is hopefully shifting. So it's shifting from the comprehensive claim example we talked about. It's shifting gradually, I hope for, and it's driven by Indigenous people. It's shifting towards a conversation about recognizing title and then having agreements, a relationship agreement based on that recognition. Not a comprehensive claim treaty, and not necessarily a court decision. Because the courts have been saying for years, you can negotiate these things. Not only can you, you should be. You should do this through negotiation. So I was invited, I'm going to be testifying next week in Ottawa at a House committee, House of Commons committee, looking into restitution of land. And that's the key message I want to pass on to them, is that you can do these things without going to court. You just need the political will to stand up, and don't say it's comprehensive claims or nothing. Don't say it's that kind of surrender treaty, but why don't you come and start by telling the truth? There's not enough truth-telling going on. Again, I don't need to tell you this. You know this. You got to start by telling the truth, and the truth is it's Mi'kmaq land. Say that, like say it. Say it. Say it. It's, you know, I want Minister Miller to say it. I want Prime Minister Trudeau to say it. Yes, we acknowledge it's Mi'kmaq land. Okay. Now we can work out, what do you do now? Instead of, well, it's Crown land, and you've got a claim to it. No way. That's not the way to do it. I don't think we have to do it that way. As I say, maybe I'm overly optimistic, but it keeps me fighting that I think there's a way forward, that it doesn't have to be resolved by a Canadian court and a Canadian judge. Most, of course, 99% aren't Indigenous themselves. I think you're better off sorting this out at a negotiation table, as long as you're negotiating on your basis, respecting your rights, not coming there and saying, oh, well, you got to agree first to give them up. Fewer and fewer Indigenous nations are willing to have those kinds of negotiations. I'm just going to go.
Yes, Chief Justice Marshall of the United States Supreme Court once said, and I quote, "It is an extravagant and absurd idea that we would claim land through raw assertion." Now, when we go to court and we win our cases, the judges always say, well, let's take a year and the natives stop hunting, or stop logging or fishing or whatever, and you come to some kind of an agreement with the so-called Crown. Okay? What I believe the judges are doing there is they're becoming co-conspirators in the greatest land and resource theft in the history of the Americas. So how do we get by this?
Yeah.
Would it be through negotiation, or do we have to go to court?
Yeah. So the question about, how it's very difficult because you're operating within that Canadian legal system with judges appointed by the government, implementing, applying their laws. It is difficult. That is a difficult position to be in. My advice to my clients is it's best to try to use a more complicated strategy, right? So, hey, we have a litigation position. We have a strong position. We want you to be aware of that. But at the same time, we're willing to negotiate a principled resolution outside of the court. Because at the end of the day, the court's not solving it. All the court can do is put you in a better negotiation position. So the example probably a lot of you are familiar with, in 2014, the Silcotin were the first Indigenous nation successful getting a declaration of Aboriginal title for the land. So you can go there and you can stand on Aboriginal Chilcotin title lands. But what are they doing now? They're in negotiations. They've been in negotiations ever since. Because even with that declaration, that doesn't solve it. What's the relationship? What's the relationship between them and the provincial and the federal government? They're negotiating it. So my view is there, do you have to go to court? Do you have to spend all those monies and dollars? You've got better things to spend them on than lawyers. to do that? Could you get to a negotiation table, a meaningful one? You got to keep enough leverage, right, to have it serious, but can you get to that negotiated outcome without being there and taking that risk in court? Maybe so, maybe not, but I think it's important when Indigenous people are thinking about this. It's not necessarily you file a title claim, that's it, we're going to spend the next 10, 15 years in court and see what the outcome is. Sometimes that is what occurs, but it's not the only path.
England is going to have a new king pretty soon, I think next week or so. Now, as part is going to be the state in Canada. His title will be he will be the statesperson for Canada. Will the royal family during this process of negotiations be involved in in some of the discussions that are going to take place concerning the crown and all that?
You can make the invitation, whether they show up or not, I wouldn't hold my breath. And then you'd have to ask, do you really want them there? When I think about that, I have Saskatchewan clients that were part of the Constitutional Express, right, in 1981. And they tell the story of getting an audience with, what was the Queen's husband? Prince Philip. So they're talking to him about their treaties and concerns, and he asked the chiefs, "Oh, so where are you from?" And one of the chiefs says, "We're from Saskatchewan." And Prince Philip supposedly turned to one of his advisors, "They don't speak English." So whether or not that was true or not, I'm not sure, but I think it's just a side of, do you really want them around the table? I don't know how educated they are about your issues. So, okay? Sure. Sorry? There we go. Good, thanks. Oh, no. So, yeah, definitely not. And I'm not giving legal advice. Yeah. I'm just here. I was invited to give an information session. So, no, I've not signed on for that. There's lots of good lawyers.